Hello and welcome to the Sim Racing Rejects podcast, probably the best podcast you've listened to today. Maybe, no promises. Today we're going to be talking about some of the differences between real-life racing communities and how they function and operate, and sim racing communities and how they function and operate. So we're looking at our personal experiences with how, let's say, joining a Discord group to join a racing league, or a website like simracing.com.co.uk, or a race booking public matchmaking system like Sim Racing System, or just a random league you find on the internet or iRacing or anything like that, might be different from going to the local track to do an autocross with the SCCA, talking to a NASA representative and getting your racing license, how it's like when you do local dirt or asphalt oval racing, how people act, what the sense of community is like, and what people are or aren't willing to help each other out with.
Yeah, and this topic really came about because as myself and Ted have been just kind of talking on Discord and sharing our own experiences, we found there was a lot of culture shock when it comes to going from a racing sim community to the real thing at a real physical track and then back again. We found that the way racing sim communities behave towards each other, the way they organize their racing series, their championships, differs a lot from what you actually expect at a real track. The camaraderie is a lot different. The competitiveness between people is a lot different. And just like the kind of socio-politics that come into play when it just comes to just getting along with people, it is totally different. And a lot of times I've actually found myself coming back from a real racetrack just kind of like cherishing the time I spent out there, because I was just thankful to spend, my afternoon around what I felt like were very normal, grounded people, because there's a lot of weirdness that occurs in the racing sim community, but at the same time, there are also things that the racing sim community, which is comprised of a lot of times just like, teenagers and dudes in their early 20s who are passionate about auto racing, they do a lot of things objectively better than real-world established racing scenes, which is very bizarre, and we almost wish that there could be a hybrid of those two worlds to get the best parts of each, because it would really help the sport of auto racing grow. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that the racing sim scene in general probably needs to distance itself from. Would you say the same thing, Ted?
That's we started first week with an easy topic. I think week 2 we're gonna be jumping into stuff that might be a little controversial, so I'm sorry if I hurt anybody's feelings by saying this.
Well, you know what? When it comes to our podcast, what we've been trying to do is we're going to have one episode where it's a very positive discussion, and then we're going to flip things on the side with a more critical / negative discussion to kind of show you that, like, while we are two of the most polarizing personalities in the community, it's not coming from baseless accusations or just schizo ranting. We are fully developed people. It's not all
cynicism. I think one of the biggest things that people run into with sim racing, which we'll go into today maybe a little bit more in detail, I'm not entirely sure, is people get emotionally attached to their hobbies. I understand that people love sim racing and they like doing it the same way I identify as a racing driver from real life racing, more so than I identify as a simulation racer. Some people identify as a simulation racer more so than the other way around. We're just here to share our experiences. Nothing that we say is necessarily totally definitive, right? It's not a tautology. It's not everybody's experience. We just feel like things could be better. We believe that things could be done a certain way differently, okay? Now, getting into it is because it isn't grounded in reality, and there isn't a barrier to entry to it. I can already hear the comments now about how I'm a gatekeeper, but hear me out. Because there isn't a barrier to entry for sim racing where you need a certain amount of expertise, or you need a certain amount of startup cost to build a car and get involved and make sure everybody knows you and likes you. You talk to your local tech inspector, you talk to other car builders, you need a truck and a trailer, you have to get out to the racetrack first, right? Sim racing's accessibility is awesome for the amount of depth it gives it and the width it gives it to find people to add to sim racing and its communities, and the fact that sim racing really can genuinely be, maybe not for everybody, but for a wide variety of people, also can be detrimental to it, okay? For example, one of my friends runs a rather popular motor racing news Discord that has a lot of people who are beginner sim racers in it. And we had a number of quite interesting characters join, one of which was trying to learn how to drift a car in a simulation software in such a way that he could exactly copy the technique of a character from, I guess, a comic about car racing or drifting. Like, there's a Speed Racer style comic about drifting, I think.
So it's Initial D.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily aware of some of that stuff. He spent maybe 1,000 to 2,000 hours learning drifting, and then sent us an angry video, which I think I'm gonna pop on screen now, of him throwing his Logitech wheel into a lake because he was frustrated. He couldn't make the racing simulator do the exact same thing he saw this guy do in a comic book, right? I would argue it's a lot easier to get a random person who's trying to imitate a comic book character or something like that on like an internet sim racing league than it would be to have somebody like that buy a car, buy a trailer, learn how to roll cage a car if they didn't, buy one used, show up, get approved for a racing license, pass their provisional races, and then show up to racing weekend, right?
Well, that kind of leads us into our first major topic of this whole discussion, in that okay. Sim racing has seemed to attract a pretty worrying concentration of just like weird people. And I've been around this a bit longer than you have. I've been reading sites like Race Sim Central and Racing and a lot of the OG websites, Black Hole Motorsports and No Grip Racing, back when I was a kid. So back when I was a kid, so like I've kind of seen the community go from this really niche hobby of basically just like flight sim style nerds to a very diverse, strange set of characters. And I've amassed just like a massive set of notes of just like the main weird things I've seen in this hobby. The first thing you realize though is that you run into a lot of grown men who are like on Discord literally all day because there's just something that's prevented them from like having a job or a normal routine, not just within the past year, because coronavirus has fucked a lot of us in right. regards to
yeah, I know,
in
I'm
regards
on
to
all the
jobs.
time.
Yeah, like there are people who are on all the time because the coronavirus has made things weird, but like you will meet a lot of people who like they haven't had a job in like 5 years or maybe 10 years. Like they have had no experience like having a girlfriend or any sort of like normal life accomplishments. They're just sim racing all the time. And you can tell that they're just completely miserable from it, and it fuels a lot of Discord drama and just like fighting over on-track incidents because
right.
sim racing is literally all they do. And when you and I first started talking, we've raced with each other, for about a year or so on sim racing system before we met. But one of the first things, when we started talking is we both started sharing stories of just like crazy leagues, we've run in the past where like members would just get like really, really upset over like minor incidents or disagreements.
Yeah,
and it would just like fraction communities.
And the weird thing is it won't necessarily fraction communities necessarily because of who's right or wrong about the incident. That maybe isn't the point, right? But you'll have somebody who this is going to sound hypocritical of me to say because people know I like to sometimes put people on blast for doing dumb shit in the simulator. Granted, I understand I have a temper problem. I do in real life racing too. I get it. However, there's a difference between like a local short track fist fight where it blows over and people go at it, but then they'll be fine the next weekend, right? And online racing communities where people dig themselves into the sand, and because they literally have nothing better to do with their time, they argue and argue and argue and argue about it all day, all week, for months, over the course of 3 months, over the course of 6 months. There's people who literally decide they hate each other and they want to look each other's personal information up in real life and start bullying each other on the internet, basically, because somebody did something they didn't like on a simulator race, months or years ago, to the point it's genuinely concerning. Like it might be a mental health issue. Like we mentioned, COVID, I'm not sure how much of it is just because people don't have better things to do right now, right? And how much of it is I know I ran into a community that was being run by an old Danish guy who sat around basically doing psychedelic drugs all day, surrounded by cats in a single bedroom apartment with nothing better to do than argue with people about the fact that they were assholes for criticizing a move in a sim race, right? And
I mean, I've seen a lot of that too, and like it gets to the point where like you'll join a community just anywhere, whether it be Discord or like a forum or just anything, right? Like there's tons of these communities that exist, private leagues, whatever, and like you'll have a meme folder going, and it'll slowly start getting filled up with like, oh, this one dude got drunk on Discord and like said some crazy shit to this guy, and then suddenly 4 years later, it turns out you actually still have that screenshot saved, and you have this guy's real name, but it turns out like that guy has like a wife and kids now. Or like you find out he actually works at like, you know, some pretty important company. Or in some cases, like with iRacing, there are NASCAR drivers who were like teenagers on the software maybe about a decade ago, like when you and I were both kids on it too.
Yeah, like early, like late double aughts or early 2010s, they were teenagers and they maybe got in a league or said some fucked up shit to somebody in like, I don't know, like an iRacing private league or a public lobby NASCAR late model race or something. And because a whole bunch of people grew up with sim racing, if they're very young, or kind of came into sim racing as a retirement hobby, there's this group of people on like both ends of the age spectrum in sim racing that have nothing but time to basically marinate on drama incidents, essentially.
And that's going to cause a lot of problems going forward because, like, I know for a fact, you know, some of the NASCAR drivers in the Cup Series today were kids on iRacing, just like we were kids on iRacing, and they weren't very well liked. I mean, the story I hear commonly is in regards to William Byron. Like, there's a lot of stories going around out there that, like, William Byron was not nice when he was a kid. I've heard that repeated by, like, 4 or 5 different people. We are really, like, we could wake up on any given day and just someone finds a screenshot of something William Byron said in a private league 10 years ago, where, you know, where maybe he called someone the N-word or something. You don't know. Like, a lot of crazy shit happens late night on Discord, and suddenly, like, everyone's got this blackmail for each other.
It's like a mutually sustained hate boner blackmail chain. It's insane. It's crazy.
And like we're all guilty of it. We've all participated on both sides of it.
I've done it. I've been an accuser. I've been the perpetrator. I've said horrible things to people and gotten kicked out of leagues. I've been the person that was like, "Hey, I know you've said a horrible thing. I'm going to send this to your boss." Right? Like, I know I've done it. We've
had the crazy nights on Discord, but we've also been bystanders where we've watched completely, you know, other people do it to other people, and we've watched it happen and just been like, wow, this is weird. And we've been the victims of it too. And we know that this is actually happening quite a lot, which is really terrifying because, again, this is a hobby where you're not Stoner Sniper 420. These are our real names. You know, you can find us on, like, Speed Hive. You can find where I work. You can find where I race. There is this like level of blackmail that a lot of people have amassed, and with how many people just really sit and stew and do nothing, that's a bit concerning. Now, another part that's concerning is some of the weird trends that really gained a foothold in the sim racing community over the last couple of years. Throwing it back to 2012 or 2013, and this is going to jog some memories, I was really surprised at like how many people I knew from sim racing jumped on the My Little Pony fad and like became bronies when it was a thing. And like I signed on to Facebook one day because like I added a lot of people, you know, from iRacing, because that's how you would organize to race in like, you know, certain splits, you know, at the time of the day to get everyone good on board. And I would sign on Facebook and I'm like, why does like half of my iRacing friends list have like brony avatars and are like watching My Little Pony together on TeamSpeak? Like, this is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? That was bizarre.
I remember that. There was this, I'm not going to name any names, but there was kind of early 2010s, maybe late 2000s, early 2010s. I remember finding out that a lot of the fastest people I knew from the oval racing scene and iRacing were either... And just, I want to preface this statement with, it's okay if you have an alternative identity or a hobby that isn't sim racing. I'm not saying this to mock people. We're just pointing out that people with certain kinds of obsessions tend to also be obsessed with sim racing, right? That's all we're talking about. People with obsessive hobbies and personalities will also find sim racing because it's kind of a weird hobby for weird people, including ourselves. Let's be honest, okay? Everybody listening to this and the people hosting it. A lot of really prominent sim racers were crazy about Harry Potter and kind of on that wagon, or Whovians, or whatever the hell they call Doctor Who fans, right? or they were nerdy like Star Trek people, or really into Star Wars, or like really into to anime and Japanese cartoons.
Yes,
or
lots of
really,
weebs.
really into My Little Pony, or for some reason had like a lot of them are like really have extremist political ideas, like straight up unironically people who call themselves like Stalinists or socialists or neo-Nazis or things like that.
And that's very weird because racing is very capitalist. I mean, there's a lot of money being
Right?
spent here. And and this entire hobby and this entire industry is fueled by capitalism. Like, that's how this works.
Yeah.
So it was really weird to run across people like that who identified quite openly as like communist or like socialist. It was pretty weird.
I've run into a lot of both extreme right and extreme left, like top-down economic people in sim racing specifically. No idea why. It seems like kind of an odd place for it, but I think really the effect that we're describing is bored, very young or very old people with a lot of money in their basement driving pretend race cars, flying pretend airplanes or similar. They're kind of fucking weird, right? And so a lot of them have like alternative identities that go beyond sim racing that they then bring into sim racing as well. And they want to share around when they sim race, that I think a lot of times leads itself to this unnecessary drama. Because when I go to a real life race, okay, I never ask somebody, who do you vote for? What do you do with your spare time that isn't racing, right? Unless it's like microbrewing and they brought food or beer for somebody or something, right? But in sim racing, you have people, you get on a Discord group or a TeamSpeak or a forum, and they sit there and they do nothing but, they type and talk all day, right? And these things come up. These things that maybe aren't appropriate for a certain space come up that have maybe nothing to do with racing, that you would never talk to somebody about in real life or at work, or even sometimes with your own family. Like maybe you've got some like fucked kind of sexual fetish thing going on, but people talk about them in sim racing communities, and it gives this very strange feeling of there's ways in which I have kind of had too much information style moments in sim racing that would never happen in real life. But I'm also less distant from some of these crazy weird people in sim racing communities than I am from people I know at the real life racetrack.
Well, and I think you mentioned something really important in regards to people's identities, them making their entire identity based around something they consume, or in, I would say, the last 3, 4, 5 years, something that's really been supercharged, the entire gay / LGBT / trans movement. Like, we don't obviously hate any of these people who are like aligned with these movements at all. Like, I mean, I've raced with gay people in real life. I don't care. Like, I've had, people come to me and say, like, hey, I'm a lesbian. At the end of the day, like, I really don't care. It seems like they tend to overshare about that within sim racing to what would be an unhealthy extent. Like, it's one thing to run, like, a pride flag next to your driver name, like, above the door of your race car. Like, that's fine. I've seen a ton of, like, gay pride liveries, like, trans pride liveries. And, again, we're not trying to hate on you or imply any of that. That's ridiculous. But there's a time and a place, and it seems like people really try and push that one part of their identity and try and make that their sole identity. And it's really not the time and the place for it, and it's almost, as Ted mentioned, like this oversharing almost. Is that the right word for it?
I think it depends. I think if you're an individual and you're in a group where you're hanging out with mostly your real life friends and you do a sim racing thing on the side, it's wholly appropriate. If you're just talking about your personal life, like you and me talk about our personal life because we know each other decently well and we race together, right? Keep the really important stuff to the genuine people who want to help you in your real life, everyday life. The internet is not your life. It is not real. Stop treating a sim racing group like it's your living room or a therapy session.
I think that's a really, really astute way of putting it. Again, you really don't want this to spiral into this almost like narcissism. And I think you mentioned before we went live, it's almost like akin to like role playing, because there are some like role playing Twitter accounts and stuff like that.
There's
You'll
a lot
see,
of role.
it's
There's
a pretty
some role
deep
playing.
dive.
Yeah, there's some role playing Twitter accounts. There's some race car role playing sim racing leagues. And I genuinely have no nice way to put this. So I'm going to be honest with you. Go race a real life car instead of pretending to do it on the internet. It's just plain and simple. Don't go on the internet and pretend to be somebody you're not. Go play Dungeons and Dragons with your friends if you want that, so you can hang out with them and have an alternate character, especially if you're using that character as a way to work through some stuff in your personal life. There are healthier outlets for that than random sim racing groups. Go join a Dungeons and Dragons group. Go play Warhammer 40K. Go to a furry con. Go to a support group for your mental illness or chemical addiction or alternative identity. Go see a psychiatrist if you need medication. Go see a therapist if you need therapy, right? Stop pretending to be...
don't let it spill over to sim racing and become this like narcissist display, because it's really not the right platform for it, and you're going to have so many different people you'll run into. Not everyone's going to be super accepting, because they really are just there to play race cars for a few hours.
Right.
They really don't want this to spiral in and turn into something it's just not.
Right.
I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. And we're not saying this to discourage people to display that they have alternative lifestyles, but do them in a space that is for those alternative lifestyles instead of bringing it into a space. Let's be honest, with racing, sometimes it has a problem with not necessarily being ready to talk about some of these issues yet. Do it on a one-on-one level until you know that everybody's on board, at least. Just be careful. Be careful with yourself and what of yourself that you display in certain spaces. Even if you're just a normal person with a drinking problem, a mental illness, some bad stuff going on in your home life, you're switching jobs and you need a new job, don't let them know where you work. Don't let them know what you're doing. Be very careful with what you tell people on the internet in general, because I want everybody who races with me to feel like they're safe and they can come and race for the racing, and none of that bullshit is going to follow them off the racetrack, both in real life and on the sim.
Well, and both of us have, I guess, what you would call lived experiences of being on the other side of that. Like, I've done quite serious interview segments or podcasts with, like, big-time sim racing outlets that, you know, talk about actual legitimate subjects, because, like, there was, like, you know, a hot topic that was going around in the industry, or just someone wanted to have my feedback on because they valued my opinion. And within, like, hours of the interview going live, you know, I had, like, schizos write to the site saying, you know, I was a Nazi or a transphobe or a white nationalist, and the amount of pressure from these, like, again, like, actual schizos was enough for them to just, like, pull the interview after just a few hours of going live. One of the crazier instances too, again, it's very quickly for people to build themselves a bad reputation in this hobby, because again, there are a lot of people who just sit here and do nothing and just, like, thrive on drama and, like, getting even with people.
People will make
which,
mountains
again,
out
we've
of
been on
molehills.
both sides of the ball. Like I've had the cops on me because cops called on me because I criticized someone's Assetto Corsa league for handing out too many penalties, and, like, nothing ever happened with it, of course, because they too realized, like, this is kind of ridiculous. But, like, people will go to those lengths, or even, you know, I don't want to go too political into this, but, like, someone ran, like, a Trump 2020 car in a race on iRacing, and that resulted in someone, you know, shadow playing it and wrecking the guy on the final lap, basically for Twitter clout. And it wasn't just, like, a random guy. It was, like, I think it was someone connected to IndyCar.
Yeah.
Like, this can get ugly pretty quickly, and sim racing's full of a lot of that ugliness. And even just, like, if you're a basic content creator too, like, that ugliness, you're not free from it. I've seen, like, very mild-mannered content creators, such as, I believe his name is Jardier. He's a European, like, ACC streamer, where he just made, like, offhanded comments about, like, I think it was iRacing, just why he plays ACC over iRacing, and it resulted in, like, a whole thread on the iRacing forums of just, like, people bashing the guy and, like, trying to, like, drum up reasons as to why no one should listen to him. And, like, this was over criticizing a video game, and this person didn't have the reputation that you and I do. This is just a normal dude.
Yeah, you will get unpersoned for practically nothing. So reveal nothing about yourself. You don't have to tell anybody anything. Show up and race. Do your thing. Leave acting like you're who you actually genuinely are as a person, too, when you're in a private group. Don't do it with sim racing leagues, especially if you don't know those people. And basically, this whole middle section of the podcast is just telling everybody, be fucking careful, because the internet is literally full of lunatics, and a lot of them make their way to sim racing groups.
And the culture shock part of this is that when you and I actually go to, like, a physical racetrack for, like, our summer racing series that we participate in, none of these people exist at the real racetrack, which is just...
I would never have anything like this happen in a real life race, ever.
I've never seen any of this either. Like, most of the guys you race with, their crew guys, their track staff, even, like, their, you know, their parents or their girlfriend or their wives they bring out, are what I would describe as subversively intelligent. Like most guys you race with in real life, they have like a trade certificate or they work with their hands, you know, like heavy duty mechanic, trailer mechanic, landscaping guy, Microsoft certified tech I've raced with. I've raced with like an auto shop teacher. These are not stupid people who are like going to sit around on Discord all day festering about drama.
No, they've got a job. They've got things that they're doing. They got places that they're going, and they need to spend a lot of their time making enough money to be able to blow it on being at the racetrack to begin with.
Yes,
there's such a low chance that you're going to be racing in such an expensive hobby as real life actual circuit racing with somebody who's a fucking schizophrenic freakazoid, because they're going to have to be able to hold down a 60-hour a week, like $20+ an hour job to even be able to be there to begin with. So just an overview of, for the kind of idea of what we're talking about, some of the costs associated with the amateur racing that I do for SCCA racing. And the more expensive racing you get, like European road racing is more expensive than local amateur oval racing is more expensive than amateur dirt track racing, is genuinely the way it goes. Karts and autocrossing and time trialing are the cheapest, then dirt oval racing, then asphalt oval racing, then karting, then, well, karting might be in between those depending on the cost, and then road racing, right? So my amateur racing series costs me more than like the mean income of the United States to do like a 4 to 6 race season. If I wanted to go do NASA Great Lakes or NASA Central and hit up all 8 races, my racing school is going to cost me $3,000 to $4,000 for the license. The car is going to be $5,000 to $10,000. My trailer is going to be $3,000 to $5,000. My truck is probably going to be a couple hundred a month if it's a used truck or I lease it, which it is in real life. Tires are $800 to $1,600 a weekend. Fuel to tow there is $1,500 a weekend to $2,500, maybe even $3,000 or more, depending on how long the trip is. A hotel is a couple $100 a night. There are not many people who can hold down a full-time job and then also spend 40 hours a week prepping a race car and work constantly that are insane and spending all their time on an internet to basically dox people, right?
Yeah, they aren't guys who sit around on Twitter or Discord all day, you know, crying about pronouns or trying to word police people. It's almost exclusively either family men who either run their own business or are pretty accomplished in their field, or it's single guys who are doing pretty well on their own. That's pretty much who gets into racing, which means a lot of like the low level, for lack of a better word, insane people that you meet on racing sims just can't enter the field. They get stopped at the various amount of like financial checkpoints.
It's just the likelihood that that's going to happen is so low that even if you run into a lot of type A assholes in real life racing, absolutely true, you don't run into many carpal tunnel wrist brace wearing, you know, crouching leant over keyboard goblins that are like, I smoked 8 pounds of meth the last 3 months so I could see the whole universe and I love Hitler and now I'm going to dox this person because they said that the grip limit on iRacing is unrealistically unforgiving. You know, like...
Well, okay, that's more or less a caricature of like the extreme end of the spectrum when it comes to like sim racing schizos, but like just the general vibe of being in the pit area at your local track, you know, on a variety of levels. Like, nobody is wearing, like, cat ears or a tail and just, like, prancing around the pits. You know, like, we don't have... That doesn't exist at the real track. You don't have people giving the announcer a list of pronouns. Do you know what I mean? Like, that really doesn't exist there. Nobody's, like, walking on eggshells to avoid, like, making a joke and, like, being paranoid that they might offend someone. That doesn't exist at the racetrack. Like, no one walks around screaming at each other, accusing them of being like a white nationalist or a Nazi. Do you know what I mean? Like that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, there might be some stuff where you have to be careful about some things people are sensitive to. If for example, in a capacity where I'm an instructor and it's a streetcar track day and the barrier to entry is kind of low and I have a person who's very young and timid, I have to be very careful sometimes about how I conduct myself around them. But that's more so in a professional sense than it even is like a personally what we talk about sense. And granted, there are, like we talked about, topics that you might want to avoid. And there might be people with type A personalities who are like giving the track staff shit for stuff that really doesn't matter. But it's more like, oh, it's ridiculous that we have such a low car count that I've been grouped with these slower cars kind of deal. It's never like this person told me I was an asshole because I ran a stop sign in the pit lane. You get them fucking kicked out of the event. You know what I mean? It's not anything like that.
Well, and even on some of the bigger issues, like, I mean, the Confederate flag has been a pretty hot topic in like the main NASCAR Cup Series. Like, there's been, I believe the flag was banned from all major NASCAR events, But like here for our local short track, like there are still very small companies like the transport company that have like a rebel flag logo. So like on the Skyjack at one of the tracks, there is a small Confederate flag on like the side of the Skyjack. Nobody makes a big stink about it or like goes on Twitter and tries to like incite people to boycott the track. It's just like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
I've seen like, the Confederate flag on like a fuel cell of a monster truck that ran up here a few weeks back.
And don't get me wrong, that's pretty fucking stupid. And if you align with the Confederate States of America, which was
they lost at the end of the day.
They lost USA World War champions 2 times in a row. USA, but 2. I mean, if you personally identify with like what wanted to be a literal actual slave state from 200 years ago, you're a colossal dumbass to begin with.
But like, so, I mean, I've seen multiple people run General Lee liveries with the Confederate flag. Like, I believe we have either a Legends or an IMCA modified up here.
Yeah, and that's an iconic car. Yeah. So I understand that. It's one of those things where even if I think something's fucking stupid, I'm not gonna go and throw a fit because I disagree.
Yes, but the key thing is like, unlike Forza, which made a big stink about it and made gaming news headlines because they were banning the General Lee. Like if someone shows up with like a General Lee car, for like a Legends race, because we do have one here, or someone, there's like a small decal because that was like the rebel flag was part of that company's logo. No one makes, a massive shit fit about it like they did with Forza banning the General Lee, right?
No, that's fair. And there's a lot of expressions that happen at the racetrack that people would throw an absolute tit fit over in sim racing that people look the other way from. I think is kind of that might not be the best example because that's a little bit more polarizing. However, I understand the roundabout point you're trying to make. Essentially, there are things in sim racing that people treat as a big deal that in a real life racing situation, because either there's so much going on or the people that do it are so rough around the edges, or people just don't have the energy, that people don't make a stink over.
Well,
right?
even in terms of the language too, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's not that people are racist or sexist or prejudiced, but like, let's be honest, you're in the heat of the battle, right?
There's a lot of shits, there's a lot of fucks. I mean, even just listen to the way I talk. I'm a particularly profane guy, and I've been trying to check the amount that I swear a little bit more recently compared to normal, but I understand that I swear pretty much every other word. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm like that because I grew up short track oval racing. And just nasty old drunk dudes around me swearing constantly, right? It's just the way that you talk. That's the way middle of butt fuck nowhere hicks that do oval racing talk. I understand that because I used to be like that, and now I still do it even though I'm a road racer. And guys sitting around drinking after a race are gonna do that. Right? It's just the way that some people
are. And again,
are.
It kind of contrasts what you see in sim racing because there's a lot of word policing that goes on. Like on Twitter, how dare you say that word? Yeah. People confronting other league members, or like even the iRacing protest system. You can protest people for swearing. Which, I mean, when you compare it to like the pits at a super late model race, come on,
Oh, I got some stories about that.
But on the flip side of this, I mean, we spent a lot of time being negative about, sim racers and basically, jerking ourselves off that the real world racing is so much better and so much more lax. There's some things that the sim community actually do objectively better, full stop. The main point we have to talk about: racing in a sim league is infinitely more organized than racing in a real series. Oh my god, like we could go on for hours about this.
Yeah, he's not even kidding. I might throw a splash up of some old racing websites right now, if I can get them. For perspective, the National Cup series that I race in for Porsche Spec 944, Porsche Club and NASA Rules 944 Cup, has a website that was designed in something like 2005, has no drop-down links, has no external links, has no anything. Maybe I'll throw up the RaceQuip website here too. RaceQuip, you can't even call them to order their gear. They only sell it to other people, and their website sucks. I had no fucking clue how to get an SCCA license when I first switched to road racing in about 2013, 2014. I had no clue where to go to get coaching. I had no clue where to go to get advice. I had zero clue where to go to learn how to build a car. I'm 24 years old. I just bought another used race car because I still don't know how to make a roll cage, because nobody will teach me how to make a roll cage. I can find a guide on how to make a sim racing setup. I can find a guide on how to make a sim racing skin. I can go on SRS and sign up for a race in 30 minutes. It takes 10 minutes to make an account. I could go and join any league Discord, and they've literally got a channel with specific instructions on how to join and set up a race with them. how the fuck do you do that with a real life racing series?
Yeah, all this stuff you outlined is like impossible to find, and even like the base level organization like functionality that we take for granted in sim racing, like the fact that every time you complete a race in whatever sim you play, whether it's iRacing or AC, there's like a results screen that's spit out that shows your fastest lap time and stuff like that.
A results screen and automatic points? Oh my fucking god. I'm not even kidding. I did the NASA Central Region Spec 944 Championship this year, and I had to go on the live timing page on MyLaps, which is also a horrible dog shit website, by the way. It's like a transponder website. I had to go on the MyLaps website to find the day 1 and 2 race results from the championship race I didn't go to try to manually do the points for myself to figure out if I won or got second in the championship, having only shown up for one race weekend, because there were so few people racing. There was no live stream, there was no coverage of the race, there wasn't a website where I could watch the results live. I had to try to go piece together my own points to figure out how I finished in a racing series. I do a sim racing system race on my Friday sim racing system we host. I sit there on the stream, 5 minutes later, I hit refresh on the page, boom, there's my fucking points. There's the finish, there's the average lap time for every driver, there's all their sector times, there's what car they were in, there's what skin they were running. There's no excuse for somebody have to pay like $300 a year for like Lap Timer Pro from MyLaps to get that same functionality for a real life racing series. And the fact that the racing series who are actually hosting it don't curate that information. Why isn't that information available?
It's pretty intense, and what Ted is describing is not unique to like his set of local tracks, because it's the same thing here in Alberta with Castor Raceway. Like both tracks I race at, which this year has been Castor Raceway in Edmonton, as well as Fire and Flood Speedway out in Rimbey, Alberta. Neither track had a social media page where they would post like the results from last night. So if I won a race, there'd be nowhere to know about it. You
literally have to go up to the goddamn tech shed and take a manual picture of the race results if you were there.
Yes.
And if you're not, get fucked.
There's
no way to get it.
Like the Instagram page promotes their objectively quite good Christmas lights display, but like if someone wins like a 360 or sportsman sprint car race, their photo isn't posted. No one has no idea who finished where. So like we have like a road course, a drag strip, and an oval track out at Castor Raceway, and they're quite good and quite well maintained. It's kind of like a Palm Beach raceway style facility with the road course running parallel to the drag strip. And like I don't know who won Pro Mod last weekend.
Yeah.
I don't know who won the main events of the last weekend's race at the Oval. I don't know who won Monster Truck Racing or Freestyle. I'm dead serious. I don't know what the points are. And the points and the various classes that run at each different track, like the drag strip, like the oval course, they all have their own private Facebook pages. And again, like even those organizers might not be up to par. Like I won the mini stock championship this year. It was like our first full season back from COVID. At no point did I ever see a points calculation. I have no idea how many points I had. I had no idea what my best lap time was because Rimbey, the smaller track we run at, doesn't actually use transponders, which is how lap times are kept. And B, Castor Raceway's transponder system wasn't working correctly because like the strip that they put in the dirt to like detect the transponder code, it wasn't working correctly. So like I have no results, I have no points, I have nothing. I was just told by the organizer, yeah, you won the championship, here's like your plaque and your trophy. Like that's how grim it is. There's no, like a lot of sim racing leagues will have like, hey, can you fill out this Google document to say you'll be at the race on Saturday, and you can get like a car count estimate. We don't even have that for anywhere.
No, we have no way of estimating who's going to be there. We have no way of trying to organize like real life racing. Keeping a consistent car count throughout a series is one of the only ways to make sure that a series is worth showing up for the drivers. And we don't have a driver tracking list. We don't have like a, hey, I think I'm going to be at A, B, C, D, E, F, G race so we can get preliminary car counts. The Facebook pages for the local track or that racing series might post like a week before the race, we've already got 5 Spec 944s signed up. We've already got 10 Spec Miatas, but there's nothing like when I go do the sim racing league on Monday nights with the flight sim squadron I'm a part of. Hey, fill out this form with your name, your car class, your number, and the skin that you're going to run, and then we'll know that you're going to be there. And we'll post it. And then there's the list that live updates and everybody can see it. So the more people sign up, the more people will come. You have to go digging for this information manually in real life. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people sit around with a car and don't fucking do anything with it. Because they don't know where to go or where to race because nobody's giving them the information to be attracted to a race to begin with.
Well, and this gets so extreme to the point where, like, you'll notice a lot of guys in all levels of racing will run GoPros. I mean, I would say it's 25% of the field that you will see a GoPro in someone's car, because you can't miss the blinking light. But, like, some people are so inept with computers that footage never gets uploaded. Or someone's, like, mom might take footage of the race, but instead of posting it on YouTube and calling it, for example, like Castor Raceway Mini Stock Main or Castor Raceway Late Model Main, it might be like titled like My Son's First Race, and you'll never see it, or it'll be uploaded as like DSC_0382, and they only
it'll
share
be uploaded as the file name, and it won't be formatted properly, or they won't upload it publicly, because it's straight up literally all like ancient shambling husk 80-year-olds filming their sons racing with a camera.
And not even that. Sometimes they just don't know how to work the GoPro, or they're like, yeah, I got a GoPro for Christmas and I record all my races, but I don't know how to import it into my computer because my computer is a bit slow. So
my whole thing was I raced for a long time. In my Legends car, I literally couldn't find a place to put the GoPro that it worked. And when I did my couple of pro racing series, other than the one full onboard I've got from the round at Road America, the races were so fucking long, and I didn't have enough memory cards or batteries. I just didn't bother, or I straight up forgot to turn the shit on.
So the lesson here is that if you're in charge or working with the admins of any sort of sim racing league, or like an iRacing league or an AC league, and you're doing fun shit in your spare time, like you're taking like, you know, screenshots of the race, or you run like a Facebook page for league, or you do like one paragraph race recaps, or you do like YouTube highlight videos, or you do anything of that nature relating to like the organization of the race, please run as fast as you can to your local track and beg them to give you a job, because yes, they are looking for someone to do that, to run the transponder scoring tower and to do the social media, and B, we absolutely need it because we are 20 years behind the times and it is crazy.
Yeah, unironically, I'm not kidding, real life racing would be doing so much better if the amount of 16 and 18 and 20-year-old dudes who run iRacing and AC leagues, who do a write-up for every race, who do a car and track combo guide for the weekend, who have a proper sign-up form, and who do highlights videos, go literally send them that shit as a resume and ask to be the social media guy at your local track. I guarantee you will actually get hired. I'm not even fucking kidding.
They'll hire you instantly.
They might not pay you that great. You might not get paid that great. It might be contract work, but they'll give you a camera, or you can buy a camera and bring it, and they'll want you filming races, making highlights, doing interviews. Go buy like a Zoom pocket handy recorder that has a dual channel and get 2 mics. Go mic people up. Go talk to them. Go document racing. Local, real life, amateur level racing needs more documentation desperately. And the people who are really passionate about sim racing genuinely do an awesome job learning how to use stuff like making a YouTube channel, like having a Discord series, having a Discord server, like having a small YouTube channel. That's the only reason I have a broadcast series on Sim Racing System. Do some real life racing, have a small Discord, have a channel where I upload car and track driving guides, right? Because I'm a racing instructor. That's all I do. And because people are so desperate for that, it's gotten me a lot of my real life jobs with professional racing and driving institutions.
Well, and the most exciting part of this too is that a lot of people wonder, how do I get into the real world of racing just being a sim racer? That's how. If you're the video guy for a few years and you do awesome shit, and then you mention to a driver, in passing that, like, hey, I've got a bunch of cash saved up and I don't know how to work on my car, but I would love to run like Legends cars or Bandoleros or like mini stocks. Congrats. Everyone on the facility loves you because they love your highlight videos and everything you've done for their sport. You've probably helped them get sponsors. You've probably even been asked to do sponsor packages for people, which I have in my case. I've got a ton of people sponsors. And if you start saying, hey, I would like to get into this and actually drive as well as do content
they're
creation,
going to be there for you. Yeah. They're going to want you into it. They want you racing, especially if you cover the sport like that and you keep doing that while also racing, and they get another person to race who loves the sport as much as they do. Dude, you're fucking in. They want you. Get in there.
The other part of this, though, is that sim racers believe when they're finally in the sport, let's say you've followed this path of doing content creation for a few years and then find yourself in a car, they believe the cars are on a linear hierarchy where you're scum if you're driving a car under a certain amount of horsepower, and that's just not the case. I mean, you and I have raced cars from, you know, shitty little mini stocks and your Spec 944 to some really like absurdly powerful cars, and anytime we step down, we've got a bit of flack from like our sim racing buddies being like, oh, like you're racing that, when that's really not how that world works.
Yeah, people, What I honestly blame for this is sim racing having a linear progression through car classes, okay? And I'm going to give people something straight, and I'm going to give them something real, and I'm going to throw out some numbers. You can take it cynically. If you're somebody listening to this podcast who hates me, you can mock me for this. I don't give a fuck. If you're somebody who likes me, this does not mean that I'm perfect. So don't think that this is me saying that I'm great. Ooh, listen to me, okay? Be critical of me for this. But the reason people have this idea, specifically sim racers, have this idea that changing car classes is failure is because racing games literally have like an earn money, buy car, go to biggest car as fast as possible progression system, right? You start out in Gran Turismo, you get your $10,000, you buy your shitty car, you win a couple races, you buy a faster car, you win those races, get more money, buy a faster car, win those races, win more money. That is not how it works in real life, okay? I'm going to be straight with all of you guys. When I was racing professionally, I was often winning less prize money than when I was racing touring Legends car races. The couple of years before I got my pro road racing contract, okay? A Legends car cost $12,500, or did at the time I bought one. Nowadays, they're up in price. They got a new engine. Depending on who you buy it from and who builds it, it might be $16,000, $15,000. It might even be $20,000, okay? A competitive used Spec Miata, because of the way prices in Spec Miata have been inflating, is $20,000 to $30,000 now. It's more than a NASCAR late model in some cases, okay? One of the biggest things that happens in real life racing is even if you can drive a fast car, if it's too expensive, nobody will race it, so you will make a lot less money racing that car than you will racing a slower car. Because the way that car racing works in real life is the prize money comes from the entry fees. So the more people are paying an entry fee to go to the race, the more prize money you get in return for winning that race. So if I go race with 30 Spec Miatas at a local race weekend, I might make more money doing that than when there was only 10 people in my car class when I was racing B-Spec touring car and Pirelli World Challenge. The biggest single weekend prize fund I made from Pirelli World Challenge was something like $6,000 to $10,000 in sponsorship money, contingencies, which are basically sponsor money that you get for like racing a certain tire or using a certain kind of brake pad by a brand. So a sponsor pays you to use their material. So with contingencies, actual prize money, and sponsor money, the most I might have made from like a Pirelli World Challenge weekend, I think a single weekend earning was something between $6,000 and $10,000. You can literally win that by doing a 40 car, $10,000 big cash prize Legends car race with a $500 entry fee per person. Okay? And my pro racing entry fees might have been in the realm of $3,000 to $5,000 for a weekend. And the tires were $800 a set, and you had to buy 3 or 4. And the fuel to tow there was $1,500 to $2,000. And then it was $200 a night for the hotel. You're seeing how this is ramping up, right? It might be, and this is something I've been talking with my friends about, is maybe getting my AMA road racing license and going bike racing instead of car racing. Because it literally might cost me less money to pay a $300 entry fee a weekend for the Juniors Cup in AMA Pro Bike Racing and race a 400cc bike, which might cost $10,000 to build, and get my fat fucking ass kicked every weekend, than it is to buy my $7,500 Spec 944, pay my $1,500 entry fee every weekend for an amateur race, and then buy 4 to 8 tires a weekend instead of 2 to 6.
Well, and this disparity in prize money is what results in a lot of the same roster of drivers, because there's typically, at any local track, there's around 40 to 50 full-time / part-time drivers, and this disparity in prize money and classes growing and shrinking and changing leadership and stuff like that, this causes people to juggle a lot of cars in a short period of time. You might see someone race late models one year, and then to mini stocks, and then to Legends cars, and then to mods. You might see guys buy a car, literally run it for one race, and then sell it for the next weekend. It's not the linear progression you see from like Gran Turismo, or just how you think the auto racing ladder works. Like for me, in my situation, like people were stoked I got sponsorship from SMS and got to race late models, but like in reality, like the races, I was towing 10 to 12 hours to a race. I was only making about $600, and there would be like 7 or 8 cars there. Whereas I'm like, look, after a few seasons, this is not practical anymore. I can make $300 running a mini stock, which costs like a fraction of what a late model does, and I can run triple the amount of races against sometimes 20, 25 car fields, the mini stock makes more sense. But a lot of people, again, like you said, they've been bred by racing games to see linear progression, that a reduction in horsepower means you fell down the ladder. In some cases, you didn't. I mean, like some of the bigger mini stock races I ran this year, for what equated to like 12 minutes of driving, I won like 200, 300, 400 bucks.
Yeah, or even just a case of driver skill level to car ratio. Like, when I was racing against Honda factory driver Tom O'Gorman in Pirelli World Challenge, he was racing in the slowest car class in the B-Spec touring car because Honda wanted to advertise the new generation Honda Fit when it came to the US in 2016, right? Honda was pouring a factory program into a 100 horsepower hatchback car class.
Absolutely, right? Based.
Because it was fucking road relevant for them.
Well, I saw that too with some of our mini stock invitationals. Like, they'd put up like a couple grand in prize money, and it was like late model drivers showing up in like stacker trailers, running like their kids' mini stock, their kids' Fox Body Mustang, because they're like, wow, this race pays out pretty well. So like, there's footage of me like driving through a wreck back in September, and like 2 of the 3 cars in front of me who spun are like seasoned late model, like dirt late model drivers who have like raced in the States, and they're running like a shitty little 4-cylinder Mustang because like, hey, the prize money's not too bad for this one. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of that.
Race car drivers like racing. Yep. They want to race in the car classes that make them the most amount of money so they can keep that money and turn around and pour it into more racing, that make them the most amount of money for the least amount of cost with the largest amount of high skill opponents, okay? I have known more people racing 5-speed manual touring cars in the US in the cheapest fucking car classes that they can get than I've known really talented people that I thought I would never be able to beat that were factory drivers.
Well, and what's interesting
because
too,
they literally just didn't have the connections or the money to go anywhere. So instead they said, let me race this class with all these people I can race against that's as cheap as possible. That is not a downgrade. That's not a downgrade in my
What's
opinion.
Interesting too is that unlike sim racing, like admittedly in sim racing, a lot of these slower cars like the Renault Clios, the Spec Miatas, are very easy and not so interesting to drive, which is why people kind of gravitate towards the higher horsepower stuff like GT3, like prototypes like Group C. But in real life, even the slower stuff is actually quite intricate and interesting to drive. Like, I mean, admittedly, there's not the speed factor running 4-cylinder stuff that I have the last few years after being in a late model. But at the end of the day, like, the car does have its own nuances, and it's just as tricky, if not trickier to drive than some of the high horsepower stuff. And because you are dealing with, at the end of the day, there are G-forces applied on you. It's hot and sweaty in the car no matter what car you're driving. The track is changing.
It's brutal. It's loud. It shakes. The car's bumpy. You get the shit beat out of you driving a 100 horsepower car in real life the same way you get the shit beat out of you driving a 500 horsepower.
So it's not this dull, shitty, opening first-time user experience that it is in sim racing.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's the physicality of it is always the same regardless of how quick of a car you're in, which is why just like going to your local go-kart track, the indoor karting facility that, screws you out of money and makes you pay like $30 for 5 minutes. There's a reason why that's fun in real life, whereas when Reza puts Speedland and rental carts in Automobilista 2, it's not so fun.
Feels boring. Yeah.
Now, in regards to what's not so boring is the actual on-track conduct. One of the things you see in sim racing a whole bunch, and it's the bane of a lot of people's existence when it comes to just running in ranked iRacing races or ranked AC races, there's a crazy amount of dive bombing and just like extreme aggression. You'll see people basically move out of the way for you if you even dare to poke your nose inside someone because they just know they're about to get ass packed. But what's really interesting is when I started racing, and it's something I notice every single time, the first or second race of the season, 5 or 6 seasons in a row for me now, is that the aggression is actually inverted. In real life, because Sims don't model damage as intricately as, God and Mother Earth does, in real life, you're allowed to sacrifice the rear end of your car because there's not a lot of vitals back there. Like, if someone hits you on the inside left rear tire, it doesn't matter. If someone doors you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect you because it's not going to fuck with your alignment. So in real life, I find the aggression's inverted. People are way more willing to chop you and be super defensive. And as a racing instructor, you can probably elaborate more on this discrepancy.
Yes. So there's a saying in road racing, which is literally keep your nose clean, okay? And the reason why the saying is keep your nose clean is because it comes from boxing. You don't want to get your nose broken, right? Because then it's really hard to focus through the pain. But in in a real life racing situation, the front suspension is tied into the steering. So if you break the front suspension, it immediately fucks up how the car handles. But you can drive around kind of broken rear suspension geometry, especially in a front wheel drive touring car like I raced. And so even a lot of times in a rear wheel drive car like the Legends car, as long as the rear axle tube doesn't get bent up too much, you're pretty much good to go. Randy Popst, I recommend watching some of Randy Popst's onboard videos he uploads videos of, this guy's a famous race instructor and an ex-pro from Pirelli World Challenge and Factory Speed Vision World Challenge in the US. He used to race with the Volvo factory team for a very long time. He races, he just recently uploaded a great Formula Ford video. He races all kinds of amateur cars in the Chump Car Endurance Series. And what you'll notice from watching his onboards is the real-life pro racing style is to drive like an absolute bastard when you're on the defensive and drive a little bit more timid when you're on the offensive. Because the way real-life racing rules are written and the way cars get damaged, it's more dangerous for you to risk breaking the front end of your car overtaking somebody than it is to risk getting hit from behind by somebody who, air quotes, doesn't have the right to be there, right? So you'll do fucking rat bastard shit to people on the racetrack when you're defending, but you won't necessarily do it when attacking because you don't want to get in trouble with the rules, right? You have plausible deniability to say, well, that person was only front bumper to my left rear tire. That's why I turned in on them, because it was my corner, or I couldn't see them because they weren't up to my head level with me, right? And it's a lot easier to get away with that with most racing stewards than it is to get away with, well, I was front bumper to their rear bumper 3 wide in the middle of them, so I sent it, which is exactly what I did on the back straight of the finale of Pirelli World Challenge of 2016, in between Tom O'Gorman and
please tell me there's footage of this. Do you have like the TV feed of this?
I do not have, but I tried to go 3 wide through the middle up the hill on the way to the corkscrew, and they both tried to close in on me and bounced off of each other and hit each other nose to nose in front of me, and I got fucking ass blasted. I got like the harshest time penalty they can give me. I got like 45 seconds added onto my race time or something. It was pretty bad, but it was considered totally my fault. I was there, they could both see me, they both closed me off, and I got in trouble for it. Now, I'm not saying that that's morally correct, because there's a lot of things in racing that aren't morally okay that drivers do that are what I call lawful evil. They're using the rules to their advantage, even if they're doing a thing that might be morally wrong or not okay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of it is judgment calls, and it depends on the steward.
Judgment calls. Exactly. So a lot of the times it's simply a case of, well, I think the steward, because of the way most racing rules are written, is going to be okay with me putting somebody almost in the grass on a straightaway because they weren't alongside me when they pulled out to try to outbrake me, and we weren't braking yet on the straightaway. I'm always going to risk that versus 100% being guaranteed to get past and lose the race, especially if there's actual money on the line.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right?
But then the reason this happens in racing sims is because a lot of sims model very simplistic damage models, where instead of the alignment getting messed up, iRacing's a bit better in this regard, so I will give them props there. But
yeah, they have an awesome
most of
model.
the time in most sims, including iRacing, it's only the body that gets damaged. So you might fuck up your aero bit, which isn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, because most leagues, especially with sim racing system, will only run like 60% damage. So it doesn't matter if you dive bomb someone. So you start taking that into account anytime you do start launching passes on people, and then it just becomes part of the game, and it's so commonplace that people just know to move over if you've got to run. But again, if you do start racing at any level coming from sims, be prepared. It's gonna be really fucking tough to pass people because you will get chopped all the time.
There's a culture shock going to real life racing from sim racing. People don't attack as aggressively as they do on the sim, and they defend way harder. Way harder. Expect to be given the bare minimum of room, sometimes less. Expect weaving on a straightaway in front of you, as long as they only move once or twice, depending on the rule, and as long as it's not in a braking zone, people will move in front of you to cover. Don't expect to be let by for shit. Expect people to sit in the middle of the racetrack during a blue flag, because they don't technically have to get out of the way for you.
Yeah, blue flags are just advisory, right?
Yeah, exactly, pretty much. Well, it depends. That's a bit more complicated. It depends on the sanctioning body. If we throw somebody a blue in a performance driving track day, it is a yes, let them by, right? Because you missed a point by. You should have let them by sooner. In a race, they are kind of more advisory. Drivers like to bitch about them because there's kind of a gentleman's rule that, hey, if you're lapped your race is over anyway, get the fuck out of the way, move over, let them by. I try to do that in real life racing, especially because I race a lot of multi-class touring car stuff, and I can make up more time letting somebody by in a good place for me and then just getting it done early than I would getting dived in the middle of a corner by like a BMW GT4 car when I'm in like a Mazda.
Yes, and that's something you learn from like reading the Delta if you have that enabled on your heads-up display sim racing.
Yes.
Anytime you're in a blue flag situation, take note of how much time you lose actively fighting with the leader or trying to stay on the lead lap versus just saying fuck it and dragging the brake and letting him go by. The Delta for being a bro to the leader is, in the grand scheme of things, a lot easier to deal with than fighting and choking everyone up. So like I'm the same way as you. Like there's some late model races where like the engine was either like failing on us, or I was just like, I just didn't have it that night, and I saw the leader coming and I was like, there's no reason to fight him, I'm gonna go high. Some sanctioning bodies, especially on oval racing, will actually tell the leaders to go, or the lap car to go low to make it an interesting race, but I won't even abide by it because I just know that like, no, this is retarded.
Yeah, and you don't have to, right? And you're going to make less enemies doing that. So learning how to blue flag and yield properly, and learning when you can yield actively, meaning actually hop off the throttle or drag the brakes or get offline, versus when you could just sit where you are and let them get around you, is very, very valuable. Generally speaking, once you're in the corner, stay where you are. On a straightaway, if you see them coming up, don't hop on the brakes, just lift off the throttle to 80 or 70%. If you're in a same class car, and they'll get by you, and if you're in a multi-class car, just stay where the fuck you are and go as fast as you can. They'll get by you anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of cooperation that occurs out on like a physical racetrack that just doesn't really exist in sim racing, and this even extends to the pit area itself. I mean, both of us have competed in pretty high level like sim competitions. I've done like a trace amount of esports for games that people don't consider an esport, but like I do because I like jerking myself off. But like we've both done a lot of like high level like sim racing against really good people. And one of the things you learn really quickly is that like your setup is everything, and people hoard the fuck out of setups. People won't share setups. People won't even give you tips. On the real pit area, man, like it is completely different. People are constantly like looking under the hood of your car. It's I think you described it when we did a dry run of this as the Bushido code. Man, like it is the opposite in real life racing.
There's this thing in real life racing which is kind of hard to explain because it's a bit nebulous and it's hard to crystallize it into a concise thought. What I will say is there is a competitive camaraderie in real life racing where people will not accept beating you if they don't actually beat you on equal terms, to the point of 5 dudes who've all had a fist fight with you and fucking hate you in the back of your car helping you change a gearbox 10 minutes before a championship race in Spec 944. I've seen pictures of this happening at national championship races. I refuse to beat you any other way than on track with a working car with the exact same setup, if I can give you my setup even, right? It's getting to the racetrack and getting the car done is so hard in real life racing that even people who are afraid of how much better you are than them refuse to race you unless your car is in 100% working order and will help you as much as possible to have it be so, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you see this a lot in oval racing because of just how frequent contact and wrecks are. I mean, guys who hate each other will scramble to work on someone else's car to make sure it gets back out there. Even if there's like a prolonged beef between them, we'll be like, oh, hey, like we need you back out there. Like, let's go like weld what needs to be welded, or let's like, let's zip tie off the brake line so you can get back out there and your brake fluid isn't leaking. Like it's absolutely crazy. And it really extends.
Everybody
even to,
wants more people to race.
It extends into like setup sharing tips too. Instead of a guy just showing up and like dominating because he found like the exact right street tire to use for like a class that uses street tires, or he found like the exact right combination of engine parts, he'll go on the Facebook group next day and be like, "This is exactly what I bought. This is the exact tires I used." Oh, and you'll get like I'll get like Facebook messages at like 2 a.m. from like my buddy who's like taking a dump looking for like used tires on our classifieds ad. I think it's called a Gigi here. And he'll be like, yo, you should go get these in Calgary. They're 3 hours away, but like I'll give you cash. Like, go get those tires. Okay.
There's literally posts on the NASA Spec 944 forum all the time of people going, hey, can I take this head off a turbo car and put it in my car? And then people will be like, yeah, that's legal. It's kind of cheaty, but it's legal. I've got one on mine. Throw it in. You throw the valve springs on too. You're allowed to change that, and it's not illegal, but it'll let you get a couple hundred more RPM. You can turn that up. You can throw a chip in. They won't look. They won't take the DME out, right? Or people genuinely will go, hey, I'm new to the class, and they're like, sweet, here's what brake pads I run. There's no, oh, well, I'm running something harder than stock. Haha, nudge wink. Like there's none of that. There's none of that. Oh, well, I'll share my setup after the race. It's like, no. Here's what I got. Right?
I mean, like, it's so open that, like, you can go up to someone else's car and they've, like, written the tire pressures they have on all four corners of the car with, like, magic marker. Like, I do that for my shit, and I've seen other people do it.
Yeah, I write my tire pressures and camber settings on the sidewall of my tires and literally mark off how many runs are on them. So people are like, hey, that was a really fast lap time. Was that on new tires? I'll look at them. I'll be like, nah, 6 runs. Like, totally honest. Or, like, yeah, they were brand new, right? Or anything like that. And when there are so few people to race, it's so hard to get to the racetrack. It costs so much money, and it's dangerous. We could fucking die out there together, right? There's this sense of everybody wants to be on the same page. Everybody wants to have the tips. Everybody wants to have the best equipment possible and only beat opponents in legitimate ways who they are also helping be as fast as possible.
It's almost like you're on a giant.
I want to help people.
It's a giant road trip with everybody together, and like.
Yeah, it's a rolling circus. You're all on the same page. You're all out there to put on a show and do a race for the fans and everything. So you all want each other to do well, right? I want everybody I race with to do well. That's why I became a racing instructor. Okay? Because after I was done with pro racing, I could have said, yeah, I'll write a book about it and I'll never pro race again because I ran out of money or whatever, and I'll stop and it'll be fine. No. I help people get their racing license so they can come and race me. And I want to make them as good as me so then I can kick their ass and say I'm still better than them anyway because I'm that competitive. Or I can say, hey, I raised that boy, basically. You know what I mean? And there's I called it like a warrior code or whatever when we talked about it last night, but really what it is it's a cycle of give and take in racing, and everybody wants to give something back to racing because they remember when it was way hard for them, when they didn't know what to do. And when people in real life racing don't like the people that they're driving with, or they think they're assholes or they're not helpful, they fucking sell their car and they go race in a different car class. They fuck off. They go do something else, and nobody wants that.
So why do you think this occurs in sim racing? I mean, the obvious answer is esports, but esports didn't always exist for people to get really paranoid about sharing setups and stuff like that with. What do you think fuels this in sim racing?
I have people do it in fun leagues and stuff like that too. What it is I think that one of the primary differences between sim racing and real life racing is that in sim racing, a lot of people who are competitive got competitive by grinding out thousands of hours of practice time more so than learning things from others. So they hoard their secrets because they earned them rather than being taught by somebody else.
That makes sense.
It's literally, it's a lack of community, right? It was, I had to fucking teach myself this, so I'm not going to tell anybody anything. This is my secret. As opposed to, well, I'm running the tire pressures that Dan Pena from stall 15 down the road, who runs the Region Spec 944 races, Dan Pena does. He told me what tire pressures to run and found me my car, so, I'm just doing what he does, right? Instead, it's, no, I spent 500 hours with camber extravaganza, and I decided that I found out that the toe made the camber change by an extra 0.75 degrees when it peaked critical angle of attack near the apex of the corner, so I run that. And I'm not going to tell anybody that. It literally just is a case of, like we were talking about earlier, people act insane because they have too much time on their hands, and they spend too much time metagaming sim racing rather than being productive members of society, for lack of a better term.
I can agree with that, because like when we build setups to go on like sim racing system and I share them, a lot of it's just because like the setups really didn't take too long to develop. At the end of the day, AC does...
shit, the other night you were literally saying, hey, I looked this up on like the Assetto Corsa forum and somebody shared one. Or you've seen mine. Mine are just gear ratios and tire pressure and maybe wing and ride height.
But there is a sunk cost that comes with developing like an esports setup, because you're contractually obligated to, and suddenly there's a lot of money at stake, and like there's no other parts of the racing scene. It's just, it really is how much time you grinded into it. So you don't want to devalue that, if that makes sense. But at the same time,
you don't want to devalue your own time.
At the same time, this existed without the esports scene. This exists back in the day with like NASCAR 03 and a lot of these. So it's almost like at all levels of sim racing, even on very simple leagues driving very like early game cars that don't have a lot of horsepower, it's almost like people are sinking enough time into this to be on par with like a professional organization. because like obviously IndyCar teams don't share secrets with each other because they put so much time and money into it. Whereas so if sim racers practicing for, you know, random Discord leagues with 12 people in it. So it turns into they're treating it professionally.
Exactly. It's sunk cost fallacy changing how people are going to act towards others.
Okay.
I think anyway. And one of the things about it is, if you think about it, there's no division of labor too. Like a professional racing team might have a bunch of professional engineers who understand how the car works. A simulator racer is just a simulator racer. Even if they're on a team, the team might be 2 to 4 guys. It's not 20. It's not, 4 or 10 or 20 or 50, right? When you buy a real-life racing car, like if you buy the Pirelli World Challenge Touring Car A-Class is an SCCA Touring 3 car, I believe, and you can buy a pre-built Hyundai Veloster Turbo Touring car from Brian Herta Autosports, or go buy a Honda Civic Cup car, or go buy a touring car like a TCR class car. The manufacturer already did all the data work that they felt like they needed to on the setup, and they literally send you the fucking setup with the car.
Yeah, you'll actually get like a pamphlet or a book.
People don't have that available data for a racing simulator. They have to curate all that data on their own. Therefore, they end up hoarding it, right?
Well, what developers could do in regards to sim racing to make this slightly easier is to give more realistic values in the setup screen. And the reason I say that is because when you go into like the AC screen and you start clicking around with really intense cars like the Mazda 787B or some of the higher level formula stuff, or like the IndyCar we've been running in one of the SRS championships this season,
you can do.
There are so many spring rates. Like you have literally like 2 trucks worth of like shocks and spring rate values when you really only use like 3 preset shock values.
Yeah, in real life you have 3 or 4. You might have 2 or 3 sets of springs that you bring to a track, and the damper adjustments happen on adjuster valves, but there's a lot smaller range typically than what's available in the simulator.
So that might play into this too, where because there's just so many goddamn options. And I think Billy Strange mentioned this when he was reviewing some of iRacing sprint cars. There are some setup options where you wouldn't even tweak them at the track. It would be part of building the actual car, and once you bake that into either the chassis or where like the mounting points are, like you're not touching it again.
Like bump steer or some certain extreme tow or camber values, you're going to have to change the mounting points of the suspension for. You're not going to be able to get them at the track. It's not a track adjustment. You wouldn't have all these different gear kits available. For example, that's a big thing. Manual gearbox touring cars on Assetto Corsa. You would not bring 100 gears for a 5-speed gearbox for a vintage race car. You would have a gear set that you always ran the same, maybe a different 5th gear, a short and a long, and then a different final drive, and that's literally fucking it, right?
100%.
Final drive.
And that probably plays into this whole sunk cost thing, where because there are just so many goddamn options and combinations of options, that people feel a bit protective of it. But like if you went to the AC garage menu or the iRacing garage menu, and under the shock adjustment, instead of it being like 20 different clicks, it was just rough track or smooth track. And that was it. You picked one of those 2 shocks. I feel like people would be a lot less protective of their setup because it was just like, oh yeah, at this track, like let's say Long Beach, we run the rough track setup. That's it.
Yeah.
Or the rough track shocks.
If there was realistically less options available to fuck around with the car and more of the car's handling was baked into it from the factory, it would not be anywhere near such a large problem.
Yeah. Is that everything? I think we covered everything. That's my whole note sheet.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. Are you comfortable with this one maybe being an extra long one?
I do not give a fuck at all. I don't even care if you leave this little blurb in at the end because, I mean, let's be honest, we're winging this. We have no outro anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Sim Racing Rejects podcast, don't forget to give it a like and leave a comment down below. Me and Austin can always use your support on our channels, but especially me because mine is smaller. Go over to Ted Ho and subscribe if you want more of my professional expertise from my racing career available to you. I say that tongue-in-cheek because I never make long-form videos, and all you get are my sim racing system streams. Fuck you. Don't be greedy. You get what you get from me. If you want to see more of this, let us know, and we'll keep making them. If not, whatever. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming out. Please do not call our present or future employers. Thanks. Bye.
No.